Another big interview, the former Australian Finance Minister Mathias Cormann settling into his new role as Secretary-General of the OECD. It's a big job, 5-year term. He just caught up with my colleague Andrew Clennell in Paris.
Mathias Cormann, thanks for joining us.
Good to be here.
Now, people are describing it as a big boon for Australia. The South Korean president even said it to the Prime Minister the other day. Are you getting this job? How are you feeling about it early in the job, and what are you setting out to achieve?
Well, so far so good. 15 days in. Look, I mean, there's a lot of work to be done. The entire world is clearly very focused on optimising the post-COVID economic recovery. There are all the long-standing challenges that the world has been focused on for some time. From ambitious and effective action on climate change, digital transformation, the need to ensure that our rules-based global trading system is in good working order. And indeed, I mean, I believe the need for market-based democracies that are members of the OECD to strengthen their focus and engagement with like-minded countries across Asia.
And that sounds like some of the agenda of the G7 that you're talking about there.
Well, the G7 are the biggest members in the OECD, but I think you'll find that there is a pretty broad consensus across all OECD members that these are some of the high priorities.
Having been in Paris now after being in Perth, and a place with, living with the virus as we've seen in the UK and France, how can you best describe the challenge of it, and how long do you think we're going to be living with this thing?
Well, look, I mean, firstly, I miss Perth. I love Perth. Perth is a great place to live, and I saw there was a report the other day. It's one of the most livable cities in the world, which doesn't surprise me at all. But look, this is where the job is, and that's why I'm here. And the situation across Europe, and including here in France, has been steadily improving, and the restrictions have continued to be eased as the proportion of the population that is getting vaccinated increases. And it's still the most important economic policy right now is to get the vaccine out to the population around the world as swiftly and as effectively as we can.
But you've always been someone who's been about retiring debt. So the situation the world faces now is foreign to the entire way you probably viewed government, right? So when do countries, well, especially Australia, if you want to say, get back to paying off debt? When is the time?
Well, look, I mean, that is obviously a key question, and I think you'll find that as Finance Minister in Australia, I made the very clear point that at a time of crisis, as the world was facing, as Australia was facing, of course it's up to governments to step up and to provide the necessary supports, I mean, to protect people's health, but also to provide the necessary supports to individuals, families, and indeed to business in order to help people through that transition. But the key is for governments to provide clear signals and clear milestones into the future on what the circumstances will be, on when fiscal policy settings will be adjusted and when the consolidation effort will start again. And when the Australian government, of course, has done that by linking it to an unemployment rate target, for example. And I mean, I think that's what countries around the world should do.
Do you have hopes vaccination will solve this crisis, or it's just not that simple?
Well, I mean, certainly, I mean, the vaccine, is having a very significant positive impact. And, at this point, from where we sit here, based on what we know, I mean, I do think that the most important measure to optimise the recovery at this point in time, the economic recovery, is to have an effective and timely, globally comprehensive rollout of the vaccine everywhere. And I mean, that is going. There is a race between in the end, getting a sufficient proportion of the global population vaccinated and the risk of further variants emerging that might ultimately be immune to the vaccine.
So that's the troubling aspect. Look, Australia's vaccine program's been criticised for not being fast enough. Well, what do you think about that?
Well, look, I mean, I think it's certainly been accelerating. I mean, I can well understand. I mean, I was in Australia still earlier this year, and Australia was in a very different circumstance to other parts of the world. I mean, the level of community transmission of the virus was very low, and so the sense of comparative safety was much higher in Australia than it was in other parts of the world. So the sense of urgency, even in terms of individuals taking up vaccination, was much higher in those areas where there were higher infection rates. And so, but I mean, look, from what I'm seeing and from what I'm reading, there's rapid catch up in terms of the level of vaccinations in Australia, and that's a good thing.
Now, people in Australia are commenting on your road to Damascus in terms of climate change. I knew you were probably waiting for this question. What would you say on that? You've always been a believer that we should be concerned about climate change?
Well, you see, I think that there is a simplistic lack of understanding of what the various debates on this actually are. I would challenge anyone to find quotes from me suggesting that we shouldn't take ambitious and effective action on climate change. I've always been in favour of ambitious and effective action on climate change, but I have been a participant, appropriately I believe, in the debate on how that is best done. I've been given a lot of speeches here in recent days, which I would argue are entirely consistent with the speeches I've given in Australia over the years, and that is for action on climate change in an individual jurisdiction to be effective, environmentally effective, you need to ensure it doesn't just shift activity, jobs and emissions into other parts of the world, because that doesn't help with reducing global emissions. In particular, if you shift activity, jobs and emissions into parts of the world where for the same level of economic output, emissions are going to be higher. We genuinely need ambitious and effective action on climate change at a global level, and whatever contributions that are made at a national level have to make a net positive difference to reducing global emissions. And in Australia, I've made that point all throughout my selection process, which was ultimately successful. We are making very significant investments in renewable energy, and significantly more on a per capita basis than just about any other OECD country. Australia on a per capita basis is investing more than 3 times as much into renewable energy than Germany or France or Denmark or the UK. Countries where people don't doubt their bona fides when it comes to ambitious action on climate change.
And what happens if China doesn't get on board? What if they're just saying we're getting on board but they don't really do it? What happens in terms of the global emissions problem?
Well, it's going to be critically important to cooperate with China in relation to this global challenge. We're all on the one planet, and this is I guess my point. We need every country to make a proportionate and genuine contribution to achieving the global objective. Whether that's Australia, whether that's China, whether that's the US, whether that's France. Every country needs to make a genuine and proportionate contribution to the overall global effort, but we can't solve it if we don't have countries like China on board.
Well, speaking of which, what do you think of the tensions between America and China, Australia and the UK and China at the moment? What are your hopes in that department?
Well, I think the hopes for all is always that we achieve the best possible relationship for the future. China is second biggest economy in the world. It's responsible for a significant proportion of global growth. It's the most significant trading partner for a growing number of market-based democracies, including across the OECD and certainly across Asia and the Asia Pacific. So to the extent that there are pressure points, which are inevitable given we have different systems and different political and economic values, to the extent that there are pressure points wherever possible, we should try and work those issues through positively and constructively. But by the same token, where there are national interest considerations at play, or where there are genuine differences based on values that are important to us, then it's important for countries to have the capacity to stand up for their principles.
Thanks so much for your time.
Always good to talk to you.